Order of the Phoenix is an interesting one. More than any of the other Harry Potter movies, for this one, I'm really going to have to separate what I personally want to see from the objective reality of filmmaking. Objectively, as an adaptation, I think Order of the Phoenix does almost everything right, which is an impressive feat considering it's adapting the longest of the books, so there was a lot that needed to be cut to fit into a movie. And I'd say a good 95% of those cuts were the right choice. With that said, from a personal standpoint, this isn't like Chamber of Secrets, where I can watch the movie without really feeling like I'm missing much. With Order, I do miss a lot of the things that were cut while watching the movie, and I do prefer reading the book. Even though, if I were in the filmmaker's place, I would probably make all the same choices they did for the most part. You may notice that for a lot of the cuts and changes in this one, I won't give any sort of strong opinion. If I don't, just assume that either I'm indifferent to the change, or I'm upset about it, but objectively recognize the need for it. In fact, that's probably good advice for all of these videos, not just this one. There are some changes the movie made that I do think were mistakes, as well as some that I think were improvement, and I will try to say so when I get to those. But without further ado, let's get started. The movie skips over a little bit in the beginning, with Harry discreetly listening to the Dursleys' news. We learn that he's been listening intently for anything unusual that Voldemort might be responsible for, as the Daily Prophet hasn't mentioned anything about his return. Even Ron, Hermione, and Sirius's letters don't tell him anything. In fact, Harry hasn't received any news from the Wizarding World since he got home, and he's incredibly frustrated about this. As we see from his internal narration, he understandably feels he deserves to be in the loop after he saw Voldemort return, but no one will tell him anything. We also learn that Harry's been having nightmares about the graveyard and Cedric's death, but the movie shows this later. So Harry ends up coming across Dudley and his gang, and this is where the movie opens. Unlike in the movie, though, Harry doesn't confront Dudley in front of his entire gang. Rather, he waits until they've all left before he calls out to Dudley. And I do love how he makes fun of Dudley's nickname by calling him by it. Incidentally, Dudley looks much more muscular in this movie than in previous ones, and this is actually taken from the book, where it's explained that he's taken up boxing, which really had an effect on his physique. So we see Harry make fun of Dudley on the way home, knowing Dudley can't retaliate. Harry's basically venting his frustration at his friends and the Wizarding World here, and Dudley is an easy outlet. Of course, Dudley retaliates by mocking Harry's cries in his sleep.
Well, you're one to talk. Moaning in your sleep every night. At least I'm not afraid of my pillow. Don't kill Cedric. Who's Cedric? Your boyfriend?
Now, in the movie, Dudley also mocks Harry over his mum's death.
Where is your mum? Where is your mum, Potter? Is she dead? Is she dead?
Which, I don't know, even for Dudley, that seems to be going a little too far. I feel like mocking Cedric was enough to make Harry pull his wand on him. In any event, the two of them end up being attacked by Dementors, though being a muggle, Dudley can't see them. In the book, this happens in an alleyway, but in the movie, it's in a tunnel. Harry ends up saving both of them with his Patronus, which again just seems like a ball of light in the movie, but in the book, it's shaped like a stag. And I suppose I might as well mention that the design of the Dementors was changed a bit. They look more skeletal here. I prefer the old design, but it's not really a big deal. So after Harry drives off the Dementors, his neighbor, Mrs. Figg, shows up. Now, Mrs. Figg is someone we've known about since Book 1, though she was a very minor character. We just know that the Dursleys would often leave Harry at her place when they went out. Regardless, it was quite a surprise in this book when it was revealed that she was a squib. In the movies, this is the first time we even hear anything about her. I can't really fault this movie for that, though. So Mrs. Figg reveals to Harry that she's a squib and that Dumbledore placed her here in Little Whinging to keep an eye on Harry growing up. And ever since Voldemort returned, Dumbledore's been having him followed by several people for his protection and to keep him from doing magic, as he knows the Ministry will look for any excuse to have him expelled. Now, in the book, Mrs. Figg is much more panicky and hysterical here, freaking out about Dementors and Little Whinging and what the Ministry of Magic will do to Harry now that he's used underage magic in a Muggle neighborhood. We also meet another new character here who was cut from the movies until Deathly Hallows, Mundungus Fletcher, a sneak thief who works for the Order of the Phoenix mainly because he owes Dumbledore. Mrs. Figg is ranting about him since he was supposed to be keeping watch over Harry but abandoned his post because of some deal on stolen cauldrons. And because he left, Harry was forced to defend himself against the Dementors by using underage magic. Mundungus himself then shows up and Mrs. Figg goes off on him, hitting him with her bag of cat food and demanding he tell Dumbledore what happened. We get a good sense of his character pretty much right away as we see how self-serving and unreliable he is despite being on the side of good. So Mrs. Figg leaves Harry outside the Dursleys' home and Harry brings Dudley in. Vernon and Petunia of course freak out over the state their little Diddykins is in. Now this whole scene involving the Dursleys was very shortened from what it is in the book, and this is one of the cuts this movie made that I think was a genuine mistake. All we see in the movie is the Dursleys getting mad at Harry for apparently attacking their son, and Harry doesn't even try to argue with them. Then the letter from the Ministry arrives telling him he's been expelled, and we cut to the Dursleys leaving, presumably to take care of Dudley. In the book, there's a lot more to this scene, and it actually adds a bit of depth to the Dursleys as characters, in particular Petunia, but this is also the beginning of a change for Dudley, which we'll see the results of in Deathly Hallows. After receiving the letter of expulsion from the Ministry, which does not speak like it does in the movie, Harry decides to run away before they arrive to destroy his wand, and even threatens Vernon with magic when he tries to stop him. Before he can leave, though, another owl arrives with a letter from Arthur Weasley telling him that Dumbledore is trying to sort things out and not to leave his aunt and uncle's house, so Harry decides to stay. Vernon and Petunia question Dudley about what Harry did to him, and Dudley describes what he felt when the Dementors arrived, which prompts Harry to wonder inwardly what kind of horrible memories a spoiled kid like Dudley would have been forced to see. Harry does manage to get through to the Dursleys that it was Dementors who did it, not him, and when Vernon demands to know what Dementors are, to everyone's shock, it's Petunia who answers. Apparently she heard that awful boy telling her sister about them years ago. We, and Harry, assume the awful boy was Harry's dad, but as we learn in Deathly Hallows, it was actually Snape. The fact that Petunia remembers this is worth noting, however. Despite the hatred she always expresses for her sister and the wizarding world, she's still held on to this scrap of information all these years, something that is not lost on Harry. This moment is then followed by a third owl with another letter from the Ministry telling Harry that the decision to expel him has been withdrawn for now and will be decided at a hearing on August 12th. Also, I might as well note that Vernon gets increasingly angrier with each owl that arrives, which is pretty funny. When Vernon demands answers, Harry tells him his account of what happened to him and Dudley, and in the process, a fourth owl arrives, this time with a letter from Sirius telling him not to leave his aunt and uncle's house. Harry actually gets angry at this. He feels someone should at least be congratulating him for fighting off two Dementors single-handedly, but instead everyone's acting like he misbehaved and aren't telling him anything. After Harry finishes his story, Vernon then asks the million-dollar question. Why were Dementors in Little Whinging? After thinking about it, Harry comes to the conclusion that Voldemort must have sent them. And if we're going by the movie, it seems like he's right, but as we learn near the end of the book, he's not. Petunia has another surprising reaction when Harry reveals that Voldemort is back. She was looking at Harry as she had never looked at him before. And all of a sudden, for the very first time in his life, Harry fully appreciated that Aunt Petunia was his mother's sister. He could not have said why this hit him so powerfully at this moment. All he knew was that he was not the only person in the room who had an inkling of what Voldemort being back might mean. Aunt Petunia had never in her life looked at him like that before. Her large, pale eyes, so unlike her sister's, were not narrowed in dislike or anger. They were wide and fearful. The furious pretense that Aunt Petunia had maintained all Harry's life, that there was no magic and no world other than the world she inhabited with Uncle Vernon, seemed to have fallen away. Vernon's reaction, however, is quite different. Upon learning that a dangerous dark wizard is after Harry, he wants to kick Harry out of the house so his wife and son won't be in danger. He demands Harry leave, ranting about magic and how he doesn't know why they took Harry in the first place. Harry stands his ground, however, and then the fifth owl arrives. This one brings a letter for Petunia, and it's a howler. It simply says, "Remember my last, Petunia." Harry, Vernon, and Dudley have no idea what this means, but upon hearing it, Petunia immediately tells Vernon that Harry will have to stay. She comes up with excuses about the neighbors asking questions if they throw him out, but it's pretty clear to us that they're just that, excuses. We don't learn what this was all about until the end of the book, where Dumbledore explains that he sent it to remind Petunia of why she took Harry in the first place, because Voldemort cannot touch him while he's there. Despite all her pretenses, she doesn't want Harry dead. Petunia then orders Harry to go to his bedroom and not to leave the house, refusing to answer his many questions about the Howler. So yeah, a lot the movie cut there that in my opinion really adds to the Dursleys and makes them more three-dimensional. As I mentioned in previous videos, the Dursleys really got the short end of the stick in these later movies, and it's very noticeable both here and in Deathly Hallows. In the book, 3 days pass before the advance guard of the Order of the Phoenix come to pick Harry up, and the Dursleys are lured out of the house by a letter informing them they've won a lawn competition. Completely made up, of course. In the movie, it happened that night while the Dursleys are taking care of Dudley. We also see Harry have a nightmare about Cedric dying, which I think is a good little touch. Now let's talk about the advance guard. In the movie, the only familiar character is Moody, though even he, technically, we barely know. In the book, however, Lupin is here as well, whereas in the movie he stayed back at Grimmauld Place. I'm not sure why the movie made this change. Lupin would obviously want to help pick Harry up, and I feel like Lupin never got a proper reintroduction in the movie. Like, we see Harry's reunion with Sirius, and oh hey, Lupin's in the back there too. I would have liked to have him properly reintroduced in this scene. As for the other members of the advance guard, we're introduced to all of them in the book. However, the only two really important ones are Nymphadora Tonks and Kingsley Shacklebolt. I love Natalia Tena as Tonks. I already really liked the character from the books because of how fun and relatable she was, but something about her performance in this movie elevated her to one of my favorites. Unfortunately, I feel like they didn't really give her much to do in the movies. She was great in the scenes she had, but a lot of her character arc, especially in Half-Blood Prince, was cut. Her relationship with Lupin is sort of glossed over, and she didn't even really get a proper introduction here. In the book, there's a whole scene where she helps Harry pack his stuff, and it really gives us a sense of her character. The movie does give us a bit, though, with things like her winking at Harry and making Ginny laugh with her shape-shifting abilities, showing her fun-loving nature, as well as her tripping over stuff, showing her clumsiness. Also, I love when she gets pissed at Moody for calling her by her first name.
Not here, Nymphadora.
Don't call me Nymphadora.
If they didn't have time for a full introduction, I suppose these are good ways of letting us see who she is. Unfortunately, after these moments, she's kind of sidelined in the movies, which is a shame because she's a great character and Natalia Tena is an amazing actress. Then there's Kingsley. He wasn't as prominent in the books as Tonks was, and as a result, I don't really have many complaints with his role in the movies. George Harris was another great casting choice. He has that dignified air about him, as well as the deep, calming voice. Plus, he delivers one of my favorite lines perfectly.
You may not like him, Minister, but you can't deny Dumbledore's got style.
So yeah, I have no real complaints about his portrayal. He was used pretty well throughout the movies. The other members of the advance guard are just background characters in the movie, but in the book they do each have some sort of role later. There's Daedalus Diggle, who Harry met at the Leaky Cauldron in the first book, and Hestia Jones. The two of them will help the Dursleys go into hiding in Deathly Hallows. Emmeline Vance, who will die mysteriously between this and the next book. Sturgis Podmore, who will be placed under the Imperious Curse by the Death Eaters and made to try and steal the prophecy in this book. And finally, Elphius Doge, who will tell Harry about Dumbledore's past in Deathly Hallows. They're all ultimately minor characters though, so there was no need for the movie to introduce them. Now, the book has a few fun and amusing moments. I've already mentioned Tonks helping Harry pack his things, where we get to know her more, and we learn about her shape-shifting abilities, as well as the fact that she and Kingsley are both Aurors like Moody, something I don't think was ever mentioned in the movies. We also see stuff like Moody's eye malfunctioning, which he claims has been happening a lot ever since Barty Crouch Jr. wore it, as well as him being completely paranoid. He wants to make sure Harry isn't an imposter, which Lupin confirms by asking Harry what shape his Patronus is, and he warns Harry not to put his wand in his pocket as it could blast his buttocks off, which prompts Tonks to ask him who he knows who's lost a buttock, a question Moody conspicuously avoids. There's also this kind of funny exchange between Harry and Lupin. I've left a letter telling your aunt and uncle not to worry. They won't. That you're safe. That'll just depress them. And you'll see them next summer. Do I have to? All of this is pretty fun, but aside from maybe the stuff with Tonks, it's all very cuttable, so I don't blame the movie for cutting straight outside. So the group fly on their brooms to Grimmauld Place, and I think this scene was done well in the movie. I really like the way it's shot. Though, aren't they being a little too conspicuous? They're flying pretty close to those ships. Ah well, it's still cool. And I love the design of Moody's broom with these footholds. Now, the way Grimmauld Place is revealed is different in both versions. In the book, it's hidden by the Fidelius charm, meaning that unless the secret keeper, in this case Dumbledore, tells someone the location, the place cannot be seen. So Moody gives Harry a note written by Dumbledore telling him the location, and this enables Harry to see it. In the movie, Moody simply taps his staff twice and the place is revealed. I guess since the Fidelius charm was never established in the Prisoner of Azkaban movie, this was a much simpler way of revealing the building that doesn't require a lot of explanation, so I'm fine with it. They all enter Grimmauld Place, which turns out to be a pretty fitting name because it is indeed a grim, old place, and are met by Mrs. Weasley. In the movie, we catch a glimpse of Sirius as the others head into the meeting room, but we don't see him yet in the book. In any case, Mrs. Weasley sends Harry to a room upstairs where Ron and Hermione are waiting. The movie added a scene where Harry comes across the house elf Kreacher, that's spelled Kreacher, muttering about mudbloods, werewolves, traitors, and thieves staying in his old mistress's house. Kreacher's design is great, and they really establish his creepy and bitter personality well here. Unfortunately, he's another character who ends up being ultimately underutilized, but still, this is a good scene. So Harry meets up with Ron and Hermione. Though initially happy to see them, this goes away as his anger at them for keeping him in the dark all summer comes to the surface. They explain to him that they wanted to write to him, but Dumbledore told them not to tell him anything, which doesn't exactly improve his temper. As is common throughout the series, he's much more restrained in the movie. In the book, he starts shouting loudly here, pouring out all of his anger onto them. I don't necessarily mind them toning this down a bit, but I do think they made him a little too restrained. Also, it makes it a little weird when the twins arrive and say,
Anyway, if you're all done shouting.
He wasn't shouting. So Harry learns about the Order of the Phoenix and that Ron, Hermione, Ginny, and the twins haven't been allowed to attend the meetings, but they've been listening in on them thanks to extendable ears that Fred and George invented. I like the way the movie took advantage of the visual nature of the medium to explain things here, as we actually see the extendable ear being used by the gang to listen in on a meeting involving Snape, revealing to Harry that he's in the Order. The other things they hear in the meeting are things that are said in more detail in different scenes from the book. As much as I would have liked to have seen those other scenes, this was a clever way of dealing with all this in the limited screen time they had. But yeah, this scene doesn't happen in the book. Instead, Ginny comes into the room after Fred and George have apparated in and tells them that their mother has placed magical protection on all the doors, so they won't be able to listen in anymore. The twins then sadly say they wanted to find out what Snape's been up to, and this is how Harry learns he's in the Order. He also learns that Bill and Charlie are in the Order too, but while Bill is here, Charlie is in Romania trying to make foreign contacts. This obviously wasn't mentioned in the movie, since neither character had been introduced yet. Another thing that the movie never brought up here is Percy. It turns out that Percy pretty much abandoned the family, because unlike the rest of them, he doesn't believe that Voldemort is back. This all seems to have stemmed from a promotion Percy received to Fudge's personal assistant, as Mr. Weasley thinks this was just so Fudge can use him to spy on the family, as he suspects Mr. Weasley to be working with Dumbledore, who Fudge thinks is plotting against the Ministry. This apparently resulted in a huge argument between Percy and Mr. Weasley, as Percy accused him of having no ambition and saying it's his fault their family is so poor. Needless to say, he's not on speaking terms with the family anymore. This whole subplot about Percy's estrangement from the family carries over for the rest of the books until Deathly Hallows, where he arrives to fight in the final battle and makes up with his family. As much as I like it, I can see why the movies didn't feel it was all that necessary, though it does raise some unanswered questions later when we see Percy working for Fudge and apprehending Harry. This leads into the next thing they talk about in the book, the Daily Prophet. They've been writing about Harry, obviously on Fudge's orders, as some sort of delusional attention seeker so that nobody will believe him, basically building on what Rita Skeeter wrote about him. And this is a big part of the reason why Percy, among others, doesn't believe Harry's claims of Voldemort's return. And this actually leads Harry to go on a bit of a rant about how Voldemort killed his parents and the last thing he wants is to be famous for that. Again, this would have been nice to see in the movie where we don't see nearly enough of this side of Harry. I think this is also a good time to talk a bit about Ginny. I mentioned in my Chamber of Secrets video that I felt they did her character a disservice in the movies. Well, it's here where we really start to see it, because this is where she stops being so shy around Harry and starts to be more herself. The movies turned her into a much sweeter and frankly blander character. In the book, she has a lot more personality. She's very fiery and is somewhat of a prankster like Fred and George. We sort of see that in this scene where she lies to her mother with a completely straight face about who left some dung bombs lying around. We'll see much more of this from her throughout the book, if not so much the movies. Also, just one last thing to mention about this scene. In the movie, Hermione interrupts Ron twice.
So what is this place? It's headquarters.
Of the Order of the Phoenix.
We wanted to write, mate. Really, we did.
Only what?
Only Dumbledore made us swear not to tell you anything.
It's like, hey, I'm the one who gives the exposition here. Normally I'd mention something about Steve Klove's favoritism towards Hermione, but this is actually the one movie Steve Kloves didn't write. So then we have Harry's meeting with Sirius, and this plays out quite differently in the movie than in the book. In fact, I'm just gonna say it, I like the relationship between Harry and Sirius a lot more in the movie. We see them hug when they greet each other, Sirius gives Harry some words of encouragement, and in general, you just really feel the emotional bond between them. In the book, you don't feel that bond as much, mainly because Sirius, for most of it, acts really grumpy, depressed, and frankly selfish. And to be fair, he has good reason to be, as I'll get into in a bit, but still, I think Rowling took it a bit too far, especially since this is the last we're going to see of him. Is this really how we want to spend our last moments with him? I honestly applaud the movie for changing this and creating a much warmer relationship between him and Harry. So in the book, when we first meet Sirius, it's under much more chaotic circumstances. Tonks accidentally knocks something over with a deafening crash, which wakes up a portrait of an old witch, who starts screaming at the top of her lungs about mudbloods and half-breeds befouling her family home. Sirius runs out, and he and Lupin pull the curtains back over the portrait to shut her up, after which Sirius turns to Harry and grimly says, "Hello, Harry. I see you've met my mother." He then explains very bitterly that this was his old family home, something we don't learn until much later in the movie, and that he lent it to Dumbledore to use as headquarters for the Order. There's no emotional reunion or hug here. Even Harry is surprised by the lack of a warm welcome. As I said before, I prefer the movie reunion. So Sirius leads Harry into the kitchen, where in the book he finds Bill and Mundungus along with Mr. and Mrs. Weasley. Sirius comes across as a little unsympathetic towards Harry here, as he talks about how horrible it's been sitting around in his house doing nothing. He can't go out because the Ministry's still after him, and Voldemort will know about his animagus form now thanks to Pettigrew, and says that he would have liked a bit of action like Harry got with the Dementors. Again, I'm glad the movie didn't include him saying stuff like this. There are a few amusing hijinks here, as Tonks tries to help Mrs. Weasley with the cooking, but ends up knocking things over, and Fred and George try to save time by using magic to transport the food to the table, resulting in a huge mess. We also hear Mundungus talking with Fred and George about some of his illicit dealings, and at Harry's inquiry as to why Mundungus is in the Order, Sirius explains that he's useful since, being a criminal, he hears things the rest of them don't. We also hear a bit about Bill trying to get the goblins on their side, but it's been difficult since a lot of them are still pissed off about Bagman swindling them. Because of their dislike for wizards, they're unlikely to take sides at all. Of course, the real meat of this scene comes after they've had dinner. Sirius prompts Harry to ask them questions, and like in the movie, they give him the rundown on what's been going on. Now, in the book, there's actually a bit of an argument beforehand, as Mrs. Weasley is thoroughly against telling Harry anything, believing he's too young to hear it, and questioning Sirius's parental abilities, accusing him of being too rash, which isn't an entirely unfounded accusation. We actually do hear a bit of this argument beforehand in the extended ear scene in the film.
He's not a child, Molly.
He's not an adult either. He's not James.
Sirius? He's not your son.
He's as good as. Who else has he got?
Hey, Ginny.
He's got me.
Eventually, when Mr. Weasley and Lupin side with Sirius, Mrs. Weasley gives in. The twins also talk themselves into being allowed to stay because they're of age now, and Ron and Hermione by pointing out that Harry will tell them everything anyway. Unfortunately, Ginny, unlike in the movie, is not allowed to stay, and she does not go quietly. I guess I'll also point out that Moody and Kingsley are not present at this scene in the book, like they are in the movie. So as we learn in both versions, Voldemort's been trying to build up his army again, and the Order's been trying to stop him and to convince more people to join their side. Unfortunately, because of the Ministry smearing Harry and Dumbledore non-stop and using the Daily Prophet to discredit them, it's been very difficult to convince anybody. Only a couple people in the Ministry, like Tonks and Kingsley, have believed them. Oh, and fun fact, Kingsley's in charge of the hunt for Sirius, so he's been deliberately giving the Ministry false information on his whereabouts. I will say, the Ministry suddenly turning against Harry and Dumbledore does seem to come a bit out of nowhere in the movie. But that's not something I can blame this movie for. Rather, it's the fault of the previous ones, mainly Goblet of Fire, for not building up to this properly. This movie honestly does the best it can with the lack of build-up it was given, and I especially love this little speech from Lupin.
Now, fear makes people do terrible things, Harry. The last time Voldemort gained power, he almost destroyed everything we hold most dear. Now he's returned, and I'm afraid the Minister will do almost anything to avoid facing that terrifying truth.
And I would like to take this moment to talk about Cornelius Fudge. As Harry Potter villains go, Fudge is very unique in that he's not a villain when we first meet him, and we actually see his descent play out in real time. At first, Fudge always came across as a somewhat inept and ineffective, but ultimately harmless minister, and a generally good-natured, if self-serving guy. We see him do things like arrest Hagrid based on little evidence to preserve his own image, but on the other hand, he seems to react to Sirius Black's escape pretty correctly, immediately recognizing the danger to Harry and taking measures to ensure his protection. However, after all of his mistakes, arresting Hagrid, letting both Sirius and Buckbeak escape, as well as knowing that Dumbledore has always been more popular, competent, and effective than him, his insecurity deepens, and rather than admit his own shortcomings, he doubles down to protect his image. And now that he's being faced with the possibility of real danger, he goes completely off the deep end, and rather than face the truth, he does everything he can to discredit the people who know more than him. Let's be honest, a lot of the damage that happens, not only in this book, but the future ones as well, can be blamed on this guy. I mean, Voldemort expected his return to be completely secret, but Harry escaped and messed that up. Thankfully, he did tell Dumbledore, who managed to bring the Order of the Phoenix back together, but the Ministry had this chance to stop Voldemort before he could get any support. And thanks to Fudge's inaction and obsession with keeping his position, Voldemort had a whole year to gather his forces again and infiltrate the Ministry, leading to its eventual downfall in Deathly Hallows. Fudge is not an evil character, and yet so much blood is on his hands. This is terrifyingly realistic, as it's often people who don't intend to cause harm that ultimately cause the most, either unintentionally through their own actions or by enabling people who do. But back to the meeting, Sirius starts to hint at something else Voldemort is after, which he describes as a sort of weapon, but Mrs. Weasley ends the meeting before he can say anything. Now, one difference here in the movie is that when Harry says he wants to join the Order, no one seems to have any objection, making it look like he's in. In the book, however, even Lupin flatly refuses to induct him or any of the other children, saying only students who have graduated from Hogwarts can join. One other minor thing as well, at the beginning of this scene, in the movie, Mr. Weasley tells Harry that his hearing will take place in front of the entire Wizengamot, which is what the Supreme Court is called. Something highly unusual for a simple matter of underage magic. In the book, they don't know this until the hearing itself. Now, the movie pretty much cuts right to Harry and Mr. Weasley going to the Ministry for the hearing. In the book, however, after Mrs. Weasley takes the kids back up to their bedrooms, we see Harry, Ron, and the twins discussing and theorizing about the weapon Sirius mentioned. There's also a lot of stuff about cleaning the house. These don't serve much purpose beyond setting up the locket Horcrux for Deathly Hallows. They find it while cleaning, but are unable to open it, and later in Deathly Hallows, they remember it when looking for the Horcrux. It's not necessary to foreshadow it like that, though, so I agree with the movie cutting these moments. I do appreciate Rowling's use of foreshadowing here, though, making a throwaway reference to this locket among a list of many strange objects they find, only for that to become very important later. A nice hint for very attentive readers looking back after Half-Blood Prince. We also meet Kreacher here for the first time in the book. He goes around muttering to himself about the people in the house and uses insults like mudblood and blood traitor for Hermione and the Weasleys quite audibly, though apparently believing they can't hear him. He even insults Sirius, his master, under his breath, or so he believes, though he still has to obey everything he says. Sirius, for his part, can't stand Kreacher and isn't exactly kind when giving him orders. Hermione is the only character who treats him kindly, not that Kreacher appreciates this from a mudblood, of course. We also learn that Kreacher has been stealing certain things to stop Sirius and the others from throwing them out during their cleaning. This also becomes important in Deathly Hallows, as one of the items he saved was the locket. Kreacher has a bigger role in the book than he does in the movie, as we'll see later. This one scene here encompasses pretty much his entire role in the movie, though in the movie it's split up into two different scenes, the one I mentioned earlier and the one during Christmas break before Sirius shows Harry the Black Family Tree. Speaking of the Black Family Tree, in the book, Sirius shows it to Harry now rather than during Christmas break. In both versions, we certainly get a sense of what Sirius's childhood was like. His family were blood supremacists of the highest order, and Sirius was the black sheep of the family because he wasn't. Eventually, he ran away to live with the Potters, and his mother disowned him and blasted his name off the tree. There are more details given in the book that I do wish the movie had included, though. We learn about Sirius's younger brother, Regulus Black, who joined the Death Eaters but died around 15 years ago. Apparently he tried to back out after realizing what he was being asked to do and was killed on Voldemort's orders. Of course, as we learn in Deathly Hallows, there's more to the story than that. We also learn more about Sirius's cousins, the Black Sisters, Bellatrix, Andromeda, and Narcissa. Bellatrix, of course, we'll see a lot more of later. At the moment, she's in Azkaban with her husband, Rodolphus Lestrange, and brother-in-law, Rabastin Lestrange. Andromeda, like Sirius, is not a blood supremacist and was disowned and blasted off the tapestry for marrying a Muggle-born wizard named Ted Tonks. They would eventually give birth to Nymphadora Tonks. And Narcissa, the youngest of the three sisters, would of course eventually marry Lucius Malfoy and give birth to Draco. Sirius also mentions his great-great-grandfather, Phineas Nigellus Black, Hogwarts' least popular headmaster.
It's not as though I've banned flying altogether, but don't tempt me. I said I'm sure you all have plenty to do before classes begin tomorrow.
He, or rather his portrait, will play an important part in the story later.